Dustin, bracketing is basically saying, okay, here's my subject property in its present condition. And then here is a property that is generally similar to my subject in superior condition. And here's a property in inferior condition, and its sales price is therefore probably less than what my property would sell for.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
Welcome, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out with you once again. We are sponsored today by Working RE Magazine. Working RE sends me an email a couple times a week, folks. And no, it doesn't feel like spam to me. This is good information that we as appraisers need to be kept abreast on. So go to workingre.com and sign up for their free email. It's workingre.com. We are sponsored, of course, by DataMaster. Great people at DataMaster, located just south of me in Utah is where their headquarters are. Great people. Had an opportunity to meet with them just recently with Rick Liffrith. Man, that guy is smart. Longtime appraiser. This is a company that you want to be involved with because they are helping appraisers to be more efficient and more effective at what they do, which is exactly what we're here about on the Appraiser Coach Podcast. Go to datamasterusa.com for more information. Again, it's datamasterusa.com. And of course, speaking of being efficient and effective at what you do, how about all the tools that Alamode will give you? Go to alamode.com or call them at 800 Alamode for more information. One more time, it's alamode.com or 800 Alamode for more information. Back on the program, my good friend and smart cookie, Mr. Tim Andersen. Welcome back.
Dustin, thank you. It is a pleasure to be with you again, and my best to your family and all the listeners.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Tim, and I know that's sincere, and likewise to you and yours. You reached out to me a couple of weeks ago, and I really like this idea. One thing you have a knack for, Tim, I don't know if you've recognized this, but you have a knack, and I love this about you, of taking things that we as appraisers or just people in general, I think, take for granted. We do it so often, we do it so much that we fail to step back and pause and say, why do we do what we do? And really dig into the nuts and bolts of stuff that we do all day long, every day as appraisers. And one of those things is bracketing. You know, this idea that we bracket. And I love the fact that you reached out to me a couple of weeks ago and said, let's talk about it on the podcast. And in fact, I don't think you even suggested, you just said, hey, here's some ideas, here's some thoughts that are going through my head. And I said, let's talk about it on the podcast. So that's why we're here today. We're here to talk about bracketing. So thanks for bringing it up, Tim. And let's just start with the 101, the basics here. What is bracketing?
Oh, Dustin, I thought we were going to talk about good restaurants in San Antonio. But anyway, okay.
That's
right.
Next, Tim. We'll do that off the air.
Okay, all right. Dustin, bracketing is basically saying, okay, here's my subject property in its present condition. And then here is a property that is generally similar to my subject in superior condition. And here's a property in inferior condition, and its sales price is therefore probably less than what my property would sell for. Therefore, my property has a value somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
Which is a perfectly wonderful way to appraise real estate under the assumption that you're dealing with what's called qualitative analysis rather than quantitative analysis. The problem, Dustin, comes when the reviewer tells us we've got to bracket our sales, but we're using quantitative analysis, and bracketing doesn't work when you've got to use dollar or percentage adjustments.
Okay.
it works really well when you're saying, well, that one's better than this one's
Right,
worth, and therefore the value's somewhere in the middle.
Right.
But it also has certain weaknesses, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Well, let's talk about bracketing. So what I hear you saying, Tim, is there's large scale, we'll call it macro bracketing, and then there's the small scale or micro bracketing. And what I mean by that is what you were bringing up earlier. I actually do on a fairly regular basis for a particular client. I do some qualitative appraising. Okay. There's no adjustments made. I pull, 3 or 4 comparable homes. And what I try to do is on a macro level, as you explained, I try to bracket. I've got one that the house in general, the property in general is inferior, one that's about the same, and one that's superior. Now, I'm not always able to get that, but that's what I'm going for. On a macro level, that's what we're talking about when we talk bracketing. And as you said, if you've got one that sold for $200,000, one that sold for $225,000, and one that sold for $250,000, and they met the criteria that we talked about, your value on your home is probably going to be somewhere in the middle. But we also deal with micro bracketing, meaning, are you bracketing the square footage? Are you bracketing the condition? Are you bracketing the bays on the garage? I mean, all of the bathroom count, the bedroom count. Are you bracketing everything? In other words, if you've got a 2-bedroom home, do you have one that is, say, 3-bedroom, one that's 1-bedroom, and at least one that's 2-bedroom? So I think, Tim, we as appraisers, that's the way we were taught. At least that's the way I was taught 20 plus years ago. I think that's still what's being taught out there, that your goal is to try to bracket both on a macro and a micro level. Is that okay? Is that a good way to be taught as an appraiser?
Dustin, here's the problem. If you're appraising a 2-1 or a 2-2 house, and the lender says, now you got to bracket it, so we got to have a superior 3-2 house. Well, that gets back to the theory of highest and best use. Is somebody who can afford a 2-1 or a 2-2 house also going to be in the market for a 3-2 house?
Mm-hmm. Good point.
If they're not, then the bracketing, well, it will lead you to a number. Well, the bracketing is a totally false comparison, a totally false analog. Therefore, whatever you derive from it is false.
Okay, so
and it's called, in logic and rhetoric, it's called begging the question,
okay,
which basically means you are assuming something to be true when you have not proven it to be true.
Okay, gotcha. So back to the bedroom count, for example.
Back to the bedroom count. Okay, I didn't quite know where we were going.
No. I think you made your point very well. I'm just trying to punctuate it by saying, you may have a market where I think most people would say, just from the outside, not an appraiser, but trying to put that appraiser hat on, they would say, okay, if you've got a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, and a 3-bedroom, that the value probably, if you've got a subject that has a 2-bedroom and you bracket with the 1 and the 3, that the value is going to be somewhere in between. But you may have a market that there's really no discernible difference between a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom. And even to a further extreme, you may have a market that, crazy as it sounds, you may have a market that the 2-bedroom in general is more desirable than a 3-bedroom. And so this idea that by bracketing that you somehow fall in the middle because in our logical mind that 3 is bigger than 2, that doesn't necessarily play out in the marketplace.
Well, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And while bracketing has obvious strengths, it also has some weaknesses, as does paired sales analysis, as does regression analysis, as does sales ranking. That's why part of our scope of work should be to come up with opinions of value via different protocols so that we can look at the strengths and weaknesses of each one and see the one or ones to which we should give the greatest weight or the least weight.
Okay.
And while bracketing is one of those ways, it is not the way. You had George Dell on not too long ago.
Yeah.
And George was talking about, some reviewer called him up and said, well, you've got to bracket your time adjustments. And George, bless his polite, kind heart, didn't climb all over that stupid reviewer and say, well, how the hell am I supposed to go into the future to get a sale to bracket my subject? Now, what a dumb remark.
Yeah.
Oh, George is too polite, too kind to say that. I'm not. But that's true. So when reviewers say, well, you got to bracket the bedroom count, you got to bracket the size, you got to bracket the garage, and you got to bracket the swimming pool, okay, but how?
Mm-hmm. So let's back up again and talk about bracketing in general. What's the purpose? What is an appraiser trying to accomplish by bracketing?
Well, you're trying to set the high and the low extremes. In other words, you're saying your house, the subject house, is so unlike A, which is superior to it, that it can't have a value near A. And it's so unlike B, which is inferior to it, that it has to have a value in excess of B. Therefore, it's got a value somewhere in the middle. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The problem comes if A and B are not natural competitors with the subject. That's like saying, well, a Cadillac costs more than a Chevy. Yeah, so what?
Okay, yeah, good point.
Yeah. So if you're going to do that, you're going to bracket a brand new Chevy versus one that's 15 years old, and yours is 4 years old. Well, it's not worth as much as the brand new one, but it's worth a whole lot more than the used one. Therefore, it's worth somewhere in the middle. Yeah, okay.
So what you're saying, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to make myself sleep better at night. I sometimes from my clients get requests that my answer, I'm not going to tell you what the requests are. I think it'll explain it in the answer. The answer that I give back is I could find no truly comparable sales that bracket this thing that you're asking for. That doesn't mean I can't find sales. But the key here is they're not comparable. So in order for you to say, hey, I want, by you I mean client, in order for the client to say, hey, I want you to bracket, let's use the garage for example. I want you to bracket the garage bays, and I say, well, there are no truly comparable sales in the subject's marketplace that bracket the garage bays. You would say that I'm okay in saying that, even though they might come back with 2 or 3 sales that they found who knows where, and say, well, what about this one, this one, this one? They have 4-car garages. Why not use those? Well, because they're not truly comparable.
That's exactly right, Dustin, and that's the point. When you go from your standard 2-car garage to a house with a 3-car garage, you're probably increasing not only your quality of construction, but your quality of interior finish, quality of materials, etc. Because a house with a 3-car garage is going to appeal to a different market than a house with a 1 or a 2-car garage. Therefore, to go to the larger house simply because it's got another garage bay is a false analog.
Right.
And therefore, the number you end up with means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I have a real problem with reviewers saying, well, you've got to bracket the size. Okay, why do I have to bracket the size? So we can see
because we told you, we told you,
because we told you to. Yeah, hello. Well, the problem is houses, all of the things being equal, do not change in sales price per square foot on a linear basis. They change in sales price per square foot on a curvilinear basis. Therefore, just because you've got a bigger, just because you've got a bigger house,
right,
and it's sold for another $37 a square foot over your subject, doesn't mean it's worth $37 a square foot more if it was only half the size difference.
Yeah.
It might be worth 35. It might be worth 28. You don't know that because the change is curvilinear. Whereas the lender, the reviewer, is assuming is linear, and there's no basis for that assumption.
The other day, I had a situation. I'll even say where it was in Star Valley, Wyoming. And anybody who's familiar with that area knows that it's a pretty unique market. It's a market I've been covering for about 20 years now, more than that, 22 years now. And it's an interesting market. And I had a situation, I don't even recall, it's been a couple weeks or months back, but I had a situation where something in the report was not bracketed. And when I sent the client back a message that there are no truly comparable sales that I would feel comfortable using to bracket, they said, well, go back in time or go to another market. And I thought, okay, well, time is all right because I can measure that time. But the question about go to a different market, what the hell are you talking about? Where would you go? In Star Valley, Wyoming, I'm sorry, the next closest market is going to be Jackson Hole. No, I'm not using Jackson Hole to bracket whatever it was that you wanted me to bracket because it's a completely different buyer. It's a completely different market. It's a completely different situation. And so, I think the point that, Tim, I hope you're making, that at least what I'm picking up on, is it doesn't matter what your client is asking you to do. In the end, you're the appraiser, and you're the one that's going to make the decision as to whether or not their request complies with your ethics and your appraisal skills.
Dustin, yeah. And something that lenders don't understand is that residential real estate appraisal theory assumes you're living someplace in Southern California in a neighborhood with 5,000 houses and 400 of them sell every year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, that just doesn't happen everywhere.
Right.
And especially in Star Valley, Wyoming.
Yeah.
So to say we'll go to another market is certainly easy to say, but the adjustments that you'd have to make to account for the differences in markets would be so large as to render the comparables stupid. And one factor of appraising that lenders do not understand, and indeed won't understand because it would demolish most of their arguments, is that property B is not comparable to property A, the subject, unless property B has the same highest and best use as the subject.
Exactly. Yep.
And you got a house in Star Valley, Wyoming, it doesn't have the same highest and best use as the house in Jackson Hole.
Right.
Therefore, you can twist them and bend them and smack them around and pour boiling water on them and do whatever it is you want to. But the number you end up with at the bottom isn't going to mean anything because it's a false analog.
Well, Tim, you taught me something already today. I've twisted it. I've smacked them around. I've never used boiling water, but I will try that in the future if that would be helpful. The other thing that's going to be helpful, of course, is using tools that will allow you to be able to do more with less. Folks, it's called working smarter, not harder. You've heard the axiom over and over and over again throughout your life, but why not do it in your appraisal business? Specifically, I'm talking about your appraisal software, the ability to be able to work faster, but not cut on quality. In fact, increase the quality of your reports by using the tools that are found in a la mode software. There's a reason that I stick with a la mode. Even after the acquisition, folks, I've stayed with a la mode because it allows me to do more with less. The tools are amazing. The mobile tools, the adjusters, the ability to bring in your worksheets and start to work with different regression analysis and paired sales analysis right in your software itself. That's a la mode software for you, folks. Join a la mode if you're not a part of the team, or find out more just by going to alamode.com or pick up the phone. I highly encourage people pick up the phone because their salespeople are very knowledgeable. You have questions. You are an appraiser. You've been using a certain software for years and years and years. Pick up the phone, call them at 800 a la mode and ask your questions. You will be amazed at what the software can and will do for you. Speaking of software doing for you, what about the ability to be able to save 30 to 60 minutes per report? No, that is not just a sales pitch. That is accurate, folks. I have 5 MLSs that I use, okay? 5 MLS areas that I currently utilize. Yeah, I have to pay for all of them. But the point is unfortunately, DataMaster is only in 2 of those areas. They're not in every area. The first thing you want to do is go to datamasterusa.com and click on the coverage area and find out if they're in your area. But I'll tell you this, if they are in your area, if it is available in your area and you're not using them, folks, you are wasting money, you are wasting time, you are wasting efficiency. DataMaster will speed up the process and make it more efficient and more effective and increase the quality of your reports. Why? Well, I'll tell you, what about human error? When you're looking at one screen and typing in the data, you're not going to have any of that with DataMaster because you hit one button and all of that information on that screen downloads directly into the report where it needs to be. Find out more, go to datamasterusa.com. One more time, it's datamasterusa.com. And finally, we are sponsored today by Working RE Magazine. Just this morning, I got an email from Working RE. I popped it open. Very interesting read to me. Went through the process of reading. This was one that I saved from a couple days ago. But I read through an article and learned a lot of information in a very short amount of time. Folks, if you want to keep abreast as what's going on in your profession, that is the appraisal profession, you need to be signed up for Working RE's free email. It's free, folks. Sign up for it, and on a pretty regular basis, you will get something dropped into your inbox, which will be helpful to you to become a better appraiser because you're more familiar with what's going on in your appraisal profession. Again, it's Working RE as in working real estate, workingre.com. And we are back, folks. We're talking today about fundamentals, appraising 101. Back to the fundamentals, this idea of bracketing. We've talked about macro bracketing. In other words, bracketing maybe the sales price or the not even necessarily the price, but just the home in general, the property in general. You've got one that's inferior, one that's about the same, one that's superior. You might have two or three others in there as well. But in order to bracket, you've really got to have those three to get on either side and kind of get somewhere in the middle. We're also talking about micro bracketing. These are terms that I came up with, not Tim Andersen, who's my guest today. Welcome back, by the way, Tim.
Oh, Dustin, it's great to be here. Thank you.
We're talking about these terms that I threw out there. Macro bracketing, meaning you're bracketing the property in and of itself on either side and in the middle, and then micro bracketing, meaning you're trying to bracket each of those elements inside the grid, if you will, in order to kind of determine what the adjustment might be, what the value might be. The problem is that it's not as straightforward as that, as we've talked about, Tim. So tell me, let's first dwell on. Let's talk a little bit about the negative. What are the weaknesses of bracketing?
Dustin, let's take size bracketing, for example. The client says, you've got to bracket the size of the house. Well, okay, it's very difficult to isolate one variable via bracketing because when you try to do that, what you're doing is simply paired sales analysis.
Okay.
And the problem with paired sales analysis is it's difficult to get enough information so that you are isolating merely one difference. Let me give you an example. You have two houses. They both sold at the same time. They're essentially the same size, same style, blah, 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 blah. One sold with a pool for $180,000 and one sold without a pool for $165,000. Well, you're going to say, oh, okay, well, the value of the pool was $15,000. Yes, that's what it looks like. But how sure are you there were no other differences in the two houses?
Right.
In regression analysis, that's called collinearity. And in pure regression analysis, you can overcome collinearity. In paired sales analysis, you can't, especially if you're dealing with only, say, two or three pairs. Therefore, coming up with enough data to bracket out or pair out a single variable in a single contributory variable, in other words, what contributes to value, is extremely difficult, if not downright bogus, because of the potential of collinearity.
Yeah. Okay. The term sensitivity analysis was raised in my mind as you were talking there, and this is something that the AI recognizes as being an approach to value, or an approach at least to adjustments. It's something, Tim, I'll freely admit I use because I think it does tell a story, but it doesn't tell the only story. And sometimes it's a challenge. In other words, sensitivity analysis in layman's terms is basically once you adjust out the known factors, what is the unknown factor? And when you bracket that unknown factor, a lot of times you can come up with a pretty good idea what that factor is, but it's not perfect, as you pointed out. What are the strengths of bracketing?
Well, the strengths of bracketing, Dustin, are it's relatively quick. And it's relatively easy to understand. Therefore, because of those two, it's relatively easy to explain. And since we're dealing with lenders, we have to write everything in small words, short sentences, and don't have any words longer than 5 or 6 letters. Otherwise, they won't understand it, especially if it's a reviewer for one of those lenders. But we've already touched on the weaknesses of bracketing. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, then why do lenders want us to bracket? And the question is, I don't have a clue. The 14th the 14th edition of the Appraisal of Real Estate mentions bracketing. It doesn't say it's the be-all and end-all. It doesn't say don't use it. It just talks about it. If you look at the Institute's textbook on residential properties, appraising residential property, It too mentions bracketing, but bracketing is just a tool. Like paired sales is a tool, bracketing is a tool, ranking is a tool, regression analysis is a tool, the cost approach is a tool, the income approach is a tool, the sales comparison approach is a tool. And the appraiser has to know how to use, not only must the appraiser know how to use all of these tools, the appraiser has to know when to use which of those tools to come up with a credible value opinion. And for a client, especially a lender, to say, well, you got to bracket this, you got to bracket that, is basically saying, well, every problem I have is a nail, therefore all I need is a hammer. And that's just not true.
Right. Well, and I feel a little bit of the frustration from the listeners in the sense that then they're saying, well, and then what, Tim? I mean, because bracketing is easy, and it's the way I was taught to do things, and it is the probably the simplest form of being able to quote unquote come up with an adjustment or come up with a value or what have you. I don't think you're saying that bracketing is not a good tool. It can be a good tool, but it's not the only tool. Is that right?
Right. It's just a tool. If you're a carpenter, you're going to have a bunch of tools in the back of your truck, one of which will be a hammer, and you're going to use it a lot.
Right.
But it's not the only tool you're going to use.
Okay, good. I think that's a good point in the sense that we're not saying don't use it, but sometimes I think, again, and this is where we started. So we've kind of come full circle. I started this episode by saying, a lot of times we just get in this mode of doing. It's this, it's a way we've always done it kind of a thing. And how often do we step back and say, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And is it the best thing to be doing in this circumstance?
Exactly. And while there is nothing wrong with tradition, and there is nothing wrong with using something that works, we have to understand that there are times when it won't work. And therefore, in those times, don't use it.
Tim, you are an amazing man. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be on the program. We, of course, look to you for great advice. And I know that sometimes appraisers find themselves on let's say the wrong side of a state board complaint. It's a scary thing to go through. But when appraisers come to me, I turn them to you because this is what you do. You help appraisers to be able to navigate those scary waters. If an appraiser wants some advice and some counseling and some coaching, how would they get a hold of you, Tim?
Dustin, my phone number is area code 561-635-5265. And my email address is tim@theappraisersadvocate.com. There's no apostrophe there. It's just the Appraiser's Advocate.
Perfect. tim@theappraisersadvocate.com. Tim Andersen out of Florida, MAI, USPAP instructor. You've been very informative as always today. Thank you, my friend, for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
Dustin, thank you. Again, my best to you and all of yours.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.